Welcome to the weekly rundown. I'm Ricky Sanders. With me, as always, is my co host and NFL Ironman, London Fletcher. Let's talk about week number one really quickly. London, did you have any quick thoughts about what happened? Did you learn anything? What did you think?
Yes, I did. I learned a lot. In fantasy, there's no such thing as I guess you would say, a sure thing or a surefire pick. I had Adrian Peterson thinking he would perform a lot better. That was one of the guys who stood out for me. But then you have some guys who performed better than you thought, like Marcus Mariota, the way he performed, for the Tennessee Titans. So there's no such thing as a surefire pick.
Yeah, Adrian Peterson hurt me. He hurt me deep inside. I had him going into Monday in a lot of tournaments, and he just didn't come through. And I thought he was a sure thing. So, like you said, it's football, and you can never really know. Well, let's talk about week
Right.
number two now, because week number one, thankfully, is behind us. And I think week two is another time to go contrarian. We talked about week number one not knowing anything, and now we do know some things, and I think we can actually use that against our opponents. The fact that a lot of people are going to look at week one and think that, that's scripture now, and that, everything that happened in week one is going to be the norm going forward, and that's obviously not
Exactly. Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
I think you can use players that quote unquote stunk in week number one, and we'll get to a guy like Justin Forsett, but I think Greg Olson's another great example, and fade players who went nuts. Rob Gronkowski, who they're now saying the Bills may actually even triple team at times, and they're already the number one tight end
I
defense.
wouldn't put it past Rex.
Yeah,
Right.
he's a great schemer. So what is your mindset heading into week number two? What do you think?
My mindset is obviously I like some contrarians to kind of go against the grain on some picks, but maybe playing some guys that just from a there's a pick I have just from a feel standpoint. So I look at some feels, some matchups that I like a little bit more than the other. So a little bit of everything. So I think also you mentioned with it being week one, we have a tendency to overreact to situations. If a guy had a really bad game, you know, the sun is not coming up tomorrow, or if somebody had a great game, then you think, oh, this guy's going to continue to produce that. It's really too early to say that for sure, but there's some guys that I like who produced well, but also some who didn't play as well last week.
All right, well, let's get right into the picks then. No reason to waste any time, and let's start at the quarterback position since a lot of times that is the most important in daily fantasy. And I'm going to go with Drew Brees this week. And you did mentioned that Marcus was a surprise last week, and he did gash the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I'm going to stick with a quarterback against the Buccaneers. Breeze did only throw for one touchdown in the opener, but he did throw for 355 yards. His best receiver was guarded by a dominant corner in Patrick Peterson. So I think Brandon Cooks is going to have a little bit more success. And I know people don't really look at football splits like they do for baseball, but Drew Brees is one of those guys who at home has just been much better over his career. Career 99.8 passer rating at home versus 91 on the road. I mean, you look at these splits: 27 touchdowns, 94 interceptions, 101 games at home, 170 touchdowns, 101 interceptions, and 103 away games. So that's a pretty big split. They have the second highest implied total according to Vegas. I think Drew Brees is just incredibly safe this weekend. What do you think?
Well, first thing I'm not going to do is rattle off all those stats you just rattled off. I'm gonna tighten it up. Drew Brees, I like as a play. Quarterback that I like that probably not a lot of people would kind of agree with is Ryan Fitzpatrick going against the Indianapolis Colts. Ryan was a guy who surprised me with his performance in Week One against the Cleveland Browns. He threw for two touchdown passes, one interception. But I like Ryan going against this Colts defense, even on the road. I like the matchup with he has Brandon Marshall to throw to, and also Eric Decker.
Yeah, Colts defense struggled week number one. I think they allowed 27 points with no turnovers. I don't even think they had any sacks. So they were a defense that struggled. I definitely think that that makes a whole lot of sense. Let's go to the running back position now because I have a few. I think Lamar Miller is a guy who is frustrating people in terms of workload. And when it comes to Philbin, I think he's going to continue to frustrate and it's going to be kind of a guessing game. But I think this is one of those weeks where Lamar Miller gets his. I know the Jaguars do have the return of Paul Puslesny this year, which obviously helps them out. They did only allow 3 yards of carry last week to Carolina and no touchdowns. But I think that's kind of because you look at Cam Newton's receivers and you just had to plan for the running game. I mean, Devin Funchess, Philly Brown, these guys, who are you really worried about? Whereas you look at Miami, now you got a first round pick, Devontae Parker, you got Jarvis Landry, you've got some threats in the passing game, and Tannehill is a solid quarterback. So I think that'll open up the run for Lamar Miller, who can catch passes as well. The team's favored. I think there's a whole lot of reason to like Lamar Miller, despite the fact that the coaching situation's a little frustrating. And then I'm going with Justin Forsett, another guy who's kind of last week's bum. Jeremy Hill scored twice against Oakland, and this Oakland team, kind of the reason I like Jeremy Hill last week, they allowed the most fantasy points to running backs last year. Justin Forsett's still a running back in a Mark Trestman offense, which, Forte broke the receptions record last year. So in PPR format, he wants to get the ball to the running back, not only via handoff, but in the passing game. Their totals looks good to me, 24.8 points. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe that Justin Forsett turns it around and in a big way. What do you think?
You know, Forsett, he'll probably have a bounce back game. The Broncos defense is extremely tough. One of the best. It'll be one of the best defenses in the league when it's all said and done. Running backs that I like going into week two is a guy that I'm sure a lot of people will play is Marshawn Lynch facing the Green Bay Packers. All you have to do is think about first of all what Marshawn Lynch has done to the Packers the last time they met in the regular season, but also in the playoff game, the NFC Championship game, and then you think back to what Matt Forte did against the Packers in Week 1. He rushed for 141 yards, had 2 TDs, caught a bunch of passes. So look for Marshawn Lynch to have a big game. And then the Packers also lost one of their starting inside linebackers in Barrington. So that Marshawn Lynch is a must play for me. Another running back I like is a rookie, and we touched on him a little bit last week. Is Tevin Coleman. I like Tevin Coleman going against the New York Giants. Reason being, you look at not only from his ability to make things happen, and Atlanta's going to focus on running the ball. They'll play action pass and hit Jones in some big plays, and I'm sure the Giants will be focused first and foremost on stopping Jones. But from a reception standpoint, the Dallas Cowboys backs caught 12 passes against the New York Giants. So I think with Coleman, you'll get a good mix going against the Giants offense. And then a guy you can throw in there, maybe you put him in there even as a flex guy, is Danny Woodhead. He had 2 rushing TDs last week. He'll catch some passes, so he's a guy that definitely you would play.
Yeah. I think Tevin Coleman, at least to me, and I think most people agree, looked like their best back last week. I mean, he's the guy I want to own in that backfield moving forward. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, and I think this one might catch some people by surprise as people are writing off the Cowboys now with no Dez Bryant, who has a foot injury, which will cost him, I don't know, at least 6 weeks at the best case scenario. I'm going to go with a small little guy who may not be built for the NFL in the long run, but I love him this week, Cole Beasley. I mean, I think this is a guy against the high-powered Eagles. I mean, we saw last week Julio Jones dominated, and obviously this is not the same kind of receiver as Julio Jones, but the Eagles defense are going to allow some points. I mean, it's going to be a fast-paced game. And if the Cowboys are going to be moving the chains, gaining 20, 25, 30 first downs, Cole Beasley's going to be a guy who needs to move the chains for them. You got Terrence Williams, who's kind of the long guy, may catch his fair share. You got Jason Witten, but I think Beasley's the guy who's really going to be the one racking up most of the catches. I mean, we learned, Byron Maxwell's there, but he kind of got dominated last week, and I don't think Beasley's going to be the main focus of the defense anyways. At $7,300 on FantasyDraft, he's really just too good of a value to pass on, and I think he's incredibly safe. So, you know what? I'm going to use him.
Beasley's good pick. He'll catch a lot of passes. Not sure how many touchdowns he'll catch. Some wide receivers that I like, I like my receivers to score touchdowns as well. And a guy that you can get fairly cheap on FantasyDraft.com, James Jones. He's going to be he was and this is a surprise not only because it's James Jones, but think he's facing Seattle Seahawks, and you think, oh man, do we really want to play a wide receiver against the Seattle Seahawks? I do. I like James Jones as being a go-to guy for Aaron Rodgers, and also a guy who's going to catch touchdown passes. Then my redemption pick is Steve Smith Sr. I feel like, after last week's game against the Baltimore against the Denver Broncos when he you know dropped a pass touchdown pass that would have gave him the game winning TD, and it was uncharacteristic of Steve. So I know he's just chomping at the bits. He's fuming. He's ready to. He can't wait to play this coming ball game. So I'm going with Steve Smith Sr. to have a big game against the Oakland Raiders.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're on the Ravens this week. I know Chris Harris is a tough corner, so he certainly didn't help Steve Smith last week. So the Ravens offense, you heard it here. We like them all. Moving on to the tight end position, I'm going to go with Martellus Bennett. This is kind of a chalk pick considering this is the guy who led the NFL in receptions at the tight end position last season. But I mean, let's reason through this game. They're playing Arizona, who was incredibly friendly to the tight end last year. I mean, guys were scoring almost every single week. Alshon Jeffrey's now going to have Patrick Peterson, and we saw, Peterson kind of shut down Cooks last week. This team only allowed 2.7 yards rushing last week. I think their rushing defense is actually legit. I know Forte's a force, and they're going to find a way to get him the ball. But I think in the passing game, Alshon Jeffrey, going to be shut down a little, which means the other guys got to step up. Eddie Royal, I can't rely on yet. I mean, Martellus Bennett has proved time and time again he's the guy in the passing game. You mentioned he's not really a touchdown guy. He's only ever scored 6 touchdowns most. But on fantasy draft, receptions are nice and they will help you in cash games. So I think Martellus Bennett has a shot to score, but really he's a great cash game option. Who you got at the tight end?
Tight end that I like is Jason Witten. You think about what he was able to do last week against the Giants. You talk about receptions being a big part of fantasy drafts, on our site. So he had 8 receptions a week ago, 2 touchdowns, the game-winning TD. I like Jason Witten. There's no Dez Bryant, so Tony Romo feels comfortable getting him the ball. He's a good play. And then Austin Seferian Jenkins for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was one of the few guys that showed up and played well for Tampa Bay a week ago in that opener against Tennessee. Had 110 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. But another reason to play him is they're facing the New Orleans Saints defense, and they have a tendency to give up a lot of yards, and the tight ends, a lot of yards passing or receiving rather. The guy that I like, another guy is possibly Jared Cook. Lastly, facing the Washington Redskins. I know Jordan Cameron had some success against the Redskins in the week one.
Jared Cook, I like that pick. Let's move on to the questions, which are my favorite part of the show each week, as we ask people, and they always come through with the most random things you could ever think of. So let's get started. I asked this on both Facebook and Twitter. Here's one from Daniel Dobish. He says, "As a Cleveland guy, are you sad that you never had the opportunity to play for the Cleveland Browns?"
Uh, you know, I won't say sad. There was a possibility when I went to play for Buffalo that I could have went to Cleveland. They contacted me, a little bit too late in the process. I had agreed to the deal with Buffalo, but I hadn't signed the deal with Buffalo, and my agent didn't let me know about Cleveland's interest, because he didn't want me to back out of the deal. So, it would have probably been nice to play for the Browns just because I grew up rooting for them, but I'm happy with the way things turned out and with the teams that I played for.
Yeah, yeah, and you probably did a lot more winning in the cities that you were in.
Well, I know I would have I saved more money on tickets by being in other cities opposite other than Cleveland.
There you go. All right, on to the next question, which comes from Twitter. This one from at Josh Kalachi, who's a well-known commodity around here. He asks, "Did any of the players discuss fantasy or anything like that in the locker room?" I guess he's referring to both football and other sports. Did you guys ever talk about fantasy, baseball, football, basketball, anything like that?
No, no, guys didn't talk about fantasy. I didn't play fantasy myself until I retired 2 years ago. So fantasy wasn't something we discussed. Now, guys discussed more college football. They were definitely interested in that, but nothing as it relates to fantasy.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. And on to the last question, which I'm going to admit is from me. It's user submitted from me. I'm going to ask you a question because a lot of people say that, hitting a baseball is the hardest thing to do in sports. I'm going to see if you agree. Would I have a better chance of breaking a tackle against you or hitting a Clayton Kershaw fastball. Let's give me 50 attempts at both. Which do you think happens first, or do neither ever happen?
You know what? Clayton's the best in the game. You know, Cy Young winner multiple times, and me, even though I'm retired, I still feel good about my ability to tackle you. So I'm gonna say, keep dreaming, kid. You're not doing either one.
So there you have it. I'll never hit a Clayton Kershaw fastball, and I will never break a tackle of an NFL linebacker, although he has yet to see my spin move. Until next time, I'm Ricky Sanders. This is London Fletcher, and we are out. Have a good week, too.